After my husband landed a big promotion, everything started to change. He began working late more frequently, and then I discovered something that shattered my trust. A $5,000 jewelry receipt, along with photos of him cozying up to another woman. What made it worse? He let this woman pick up our kids from school without saying a word to me. This is a throwaway account because my friends and family are on Reddit, and I've changed all the names and adjusted a few small details for privacy. Honestly, I never thought I'd find myself writing something like this, but I'm desperate for advice, and maybe just a chance to vent. I'm 34, and I've been married to my husband, James, who's 35, for a decade. We have 2 kids together, our daughter, Lily, who's 8, and our son, Ethan, who's 5. Until 6 months ago, I genuinely believed we had the perfect life. We both had stable jobs, a cozy house in the suburbs, and made time for family vacations. Now, I feel like I'm watching everything fall apart, trying to figure out how James went from being such an incredible father and husband to someone I barely recognize. Let me go back to the beginning. James and I met in our mid-20s through some mutual friends at a laid-back housewarming party. He was everything I had ever hoped for in a partner. Charming, ambitious, and someone who genuinely seemed to want to build a life together. We dated for 2 years, during which he was nothing but supportive, loving, and kind. When he proposed one quiet evening at home, because he knew I didn't like big public gestures, I was sure I'd found my person for life. Our wedding was a small, intimate ceremony with just close family and friends, and those first few years together were honestly amazing. We both had solid careers, encouraged each other's dreams, and worked as a team to build our future. One of the biggest milestones was buying our dream house. A gorgeous colonial-style home with a big backyard, perfect for the family we envisioned. When Lily was born 3 years into our marriage, James threw himself into being a dad. He took paternity leave and handled late-night feedings like a pro. 3 years later, Ethan arrived, and our family felt complete. James was climbing the ranks in corporate sales while I worked in account management at a marketing firm. We both did well financially, but James's career really began to soar about 5 years into our marriage. He was moving up the corporate ladder so quickly, and I couldn't have been prouder. James's success brought us a comfortable life. We enjoyed nice vacations, managed to start college funds for both kids, and felt secure about our future. Most importantly, we seemed genuinely happy. Sure, we had the occasional disagreement like any married couple, but we always found a way to work through them together. Everything began to shift about 8 months ago, right after James was promoted to regional director at his company. The promotion came with a hefty pay raise and a significant increase in responsibilities, which we both knew would require adjustments to our family routine. At first, the changes were subtle and completely understandable. James started working later hours more often, which made sense given his new role managing teams across several states. He'd miss dinner once or twice a week, but he always let me know ahead of time and made an effort to spend extra quality time with the kids on weekends. I fully supported his career growth and did my best to help with the transition. I took on more of the childcare duties, handled all the household chores, and tried to be patient when he seemed stressed or distracted. But slowly, the dynamic between us began to shift in ways I couldn't ignore. The missed dinners turned into entire weekends where he'd barely be around. His messages became short and impersonal, often just "working late" or "don't wait up." When he came home late, there was a new scent clinging to him, an unfamiliar cologne. He brushed it off, claiming he'd borrowed some from a colleague at the gym. When I tried to bring up how distant he'd become, James would snap back defensively, accusing me of not supporting his career. He'd remind me that his new position was for the benefit of our entire family and called me selfish for complaining about his long hours. I started to feel like I couldn't voice my concerns without being dismissed or blamed. The first major red flag came when I noticed something unusual in our finances. James and I had always kept a joint account for household expenses and savings, while maintaining separate accounts for our personal spending. It was a system that had worked flawlessly throughout our marriage. But one day, as I logged in to pay the monthly bills, I noticed a series of large transfers from our joint account to another account I didn't recognize. These weren't small amounts either. We're talking substantial sums. The amounts being transferred were staggering, thousands of dollars at a time. That evening, I confronted James about it, and he dismissed my concerns, saying it was all for business expenses. He explained that sometimes he had to pay out of pocket for client entertainment and corporate events, and the reimbursement process could take a few weeks. His explanation seemed plausible, especially considering his new role, but something about the way he said it felt too polished, almost rehearsed. I might have let it go if it weren't for what happened next. While I was doing laundry one weekend, I found a receipt in his pocket from a high-end jewelry store. It was for a $5,000 bracelet purchase just 2 weeks earlier. The timing didn't make sense. My birthday had passed months ago, and our anniversary was still half a year away. The kids were too young for such an extravagant gift, and no close relatives had a birthday coming up. When I brought it up, James's reaction was explosive. He accused me of prying into his life and invading his privacy, insisting he had every right to spend his money however he wanted. Then he stormed out of the house and didn't return that night, texting later to say he needed space and would be staying at a friend's place to cool off. That was the moment I started paying closer attention. I noticed James had changed all the passwords on his devices and accounts, locking me out of everything. But he'd forgotten one crucial detail: our shared cloud storage, where our family photos automatically backed up. Soon, new pictures started appearing in the cloud. In these photos, James was with a woman I didn't recognize. They were at restaurants and hotels I knew we'd never visited together. The way they interacted in the photos was intimate, too intimate. In some, they were dressed up for what looked like work events, but in others, they were clearly on personal outings, holding hands or caught in moments that made my stomach turn. I didn't know how to confront James about what I'd found. I was still trying to process it when he announced he'd be heading to Europe on a 2-week business trip. He claimed it was a last-minute requirement from corporate, but I knew his company well enough to know they didn't plan international travel without significant advance notice. While James was away, I decided it was time to dig deeper. As it turned out, he wasn't entirely lying about the Europe trip. He did have some business meetings scheduled there, but his expense reports told a very different story. The expense reports revealed something even more damning. James had extended his Europe trip by an extra week, during which Sarah, the woman from the photos, had joined him. To my horror, all of this was charged to our joint account. Those 2 weeks while he was away gave me the time I desperately needed to piece everything together. Through our joint account records, I uncovered a trail of transactions that painted a devastating picture. There were recurring payments for an apartment lease, which had started just 3 months after James's promotion. Alongside that were countless charges at upscale restaurants, luxury hotels, and high-end stores, most on dates when he claimed to be working late or away on business trips. The amounts were staggering, but the breaking point came when our daughter, Lily, casually mentioned that Daddy's friend Sarah had picked her up from school one day when I was tied up in a meeting. My stomach dropped. I had never heard of Sarah before, let alone given anyone by that name permission to pick up my children. I called the school immediately to confirm, and they told me that James had added Sarah to the approved pickup list months ago, listing her as a family friend. The idea of this woman, someone I now suspected was his mistress, having access to my children made me feel physically sick. That was the moment I knew I needed professional help. I reached out to a lawyer and started documenting every piece of evidence I could find. My lawyer advised me to act as though everything was normal while we built our case, which turned out to be one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. For 6 long and agonizing weeks, I lived a double life. Outwardly, I was the supportive wife keeping up the appearance of a happy marriage. Inwardly, I was the heartbroken spouse meticulously gathering proof of James's betrayal. Through this process, I discovered he had been systematically draining money not only from our joint account but also from our investment accounts. He was clearly preparing for a future that didn't include me. The emotional toll was immense. I couldn't eat, I barely slept, and every notification on my phone sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I began losing weight, and my close friends noticed the changes. But I couldn't bring myself to tell them what was happening. I felt a deep sense of shame, as though James's infidelity reflected poorly on me somehow. Then, last week, James came home. James came home earlier than usual one evening and told me we needed to talk. He sat me down at the kitchen table, looking serious, and said he thought we should separate. He claimed we'd grown apart and that he needed space to figure out his next steps. Then, he dropped the bombshell. He had already found an apartment and thought it would be best if he moved out immediately. What James didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this moment. When he finished his little speech, I stayed calm and reached for a folder I'd placed nearby. I slid it across the table toward him. Inside was everything I'd uncovered, proof of his lies, his financial deceit, and his affair with Sarah. His face went white as he opened the folder and saw the evidence laid out before him. That's when the floodgates opened. He admitted that Sarah wasn't just a colleague. She was someone he'd met at a conference the previous year, and they'd been seeing each other for months. The apartment wasn't something new either. It was the place they'd been meeting in secret all along. The money he'd been moving out of our accounts wasn't for business expenses. It was his escape fund, meticulously planned for a new life with her. James kept talking, trying to justify his actions. He said he hadn't meant for any of this to happen, that it had started as an innocent friendship and evolved into something more. He claimed he tried to fight his feelings but couldn't, and then, as if to absolve himself, he suggested that our marriage had been struggling for years. Hearing that, after everything we'd built together, was infuriating, especially since it couldn't have been further from the truth. When he finally finished his excuses, I stayed silent for a moment. Then, I reached into the folder again and handed him a new document, the divorce papers my lawyer had prepared. His expression shifted, first to shock, then anger, and finally to resignation. Without saying a word, he picked up the papers, stood, and walked out the door. That was 3 days ago. I'm still trying to process everything that's happened and figure out how to move forward. The kids are staying with my sister this weekend, while I try to get my bearings. My lawyer assures me we have a strong case for a favorable divorce settlement, especially with the evidence of his financial manipulations and unauthorized use of our joint funds. But that's little consolation when I think about the life we had, the life he's torn apart. If anyone out there has been through something similar, I could really use some advice. How did you explain it to your kids? How do you even begin to move forward from something like this? How long does it take before life starts to feel normal again? Edit. Thank you to everyone who's reached out with supportive comments and messages. It means more than I can say. I wanted to address a few common questions about what's been happening. First, my lawyer and I have been very thorough in protecting ourselves, both legally and financially. I've made multiple copies of all the evidence, financial records, text messages, photos, and anything else incriminating. These are stored in several places: cloud storage, USB drives, hard copies at my sister's house, and with my lawyer. We've documented everything from bank statements and credit card bills to investment account activity over the past 18 months. This includes screenshots of suspicious transactions, the jewelry receipt, and even the apartment lease. My lawyer reminds me to keep recording new developments as they happen, which I've been doing diligently. Regarding the kids, we're trying to keep things as stable as possible for them. They're staying at their current school for now, and I've made the administration and their teachers aware of the situation. The school's guidance counselor is also keeping an eye on them to ensure they have the support they need. As soon as everything came to light, I revoked Sarah's authorization to pick them up from school. Since their current school is closer to James's new apartment, I'm researching other schools in my area for next semester, prioritizing ones with strong counseling programs. On the financial side, I've taken significant steps to secure everything. I froze all 3 of our joint credit cards and opened a new personal account at a different bank for my paychecks. Every password has been updated: email, social media, banking, phone, you name it. I've also set up credit monitoring to catch any attempts he might make to open new accounts. All the money he's withdrawn or transferred has been documented in a detailed spreadsheet that outlines our assets and debts. I'm also putting aside whatever funds I can in a separate account to cover legal fees. For now, our custody and living situation is temporary but stable. I have primary custody of the kids, with James having supervised visitation every other weekend. He's also required to give 24 hours notice before contacting the kids. I'm still living in our house for the time being. I've taken every precaution to secure the house. The locks and security system codes have all been changed, and I've installed security cameras around the property. It might seem excessive, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. I'm also keeping a detailed log of every visit James makes and all his interactions with the kids, just to make sure everything is documented. Update number 1. It's been 3 weeks since my last post, and I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone who commented or reached out. Your advice and shared experiences have been a tremendous source of support during this incredibly tough time. A lot has happened since then, and I wanted to share some updates. The divorce proceedings are now underway, and they've been eventful, to say the least. At first, James tried to argue for 50-50 custody of the kids, despite spending very little time with them over the past year. However, when my lawyer presented evidence of his absences, including detailed records of all the events he missed and the incident with Sarah picking them up from school without my consent, the tone of the custody discussions shifted quickly. His lawyer has since proposed a more realistic custody arrangement. The financial side of the divorce has been more complex than I anticipated. We discovered that James had moved even more money than I originally thought. Not only did he take funds from our joint accounts and investment portfolios, but he also withdrew money from the children's college funds. When confronted about it during mediation, James claimed he was protecting the money but couldn't provide a convincing explanation as to why it needed protection from me, their mother. The mediator and even his own lawyer were visibly unimpressed with his reasoning. To make matters worse, we found out that James had opened multiple credit cards in his name and racked up significant debt, likely to support his lifestyle with Sarah. While these debts are technically in his name alone, he used our shared finances to make payments on them, which has become a major sticking point in the divorce negotiations. As for the kids, they're struggling, but I've made sure they're getting professional help. I found a wonderful child therapist who specializes in helping kids cope with divorce. Both Lily and Ethan have started seeing her weekly, and I'm already seeing signs that it's helping. Lily is having a harder time than her little brother. At 8, she's old enough to grasp more of what's happening, and she's angry with her dad. She flat out refuses to speak to him during his scheduled visitations, and I can see how much she's hurting. Lily refuses to answer her dad's phone calls and had a complete meltdown when he tried to take her out to dinner last week. Meanwhile, Ethan seems more confused than anything else. He keeps asking me when Daddy's coming back home, and every time, it breaks my heart a little more. The therapist reassures me that these are normal reactions, and that we just need to give them time to process everything. James's attempts to salvage his reputation within our social circle have been nothing short of laughable. He's been telling anyone who will listen that our marriage was failing for years, and that he only stayed for the kids. But our mutual friends know the truth. They've seen how he changed over the past year and how happy we were before that. A few of them have even shown me messages where he's tried to convince them to take his side. Fortunately, they've been incredibly supportive of me instead. Last week, Sarah, his girlfriend, reached out to me. Apparently, she had no idea James was still living with me and the kids. He'd told her we had been separated for over a year and were only keeping up appearances for family reasons. When she found out the truth through mutual acquaintances, she ended things with him immediately. Now James is furious at both of us, as if we're somehow responsible for the fallout from his own lies and choices. Sarah was incredibly apologetic and even offered to provide a statement for my lawyer detailing when their relationship began and the things James told her about our marriage. As for me, I'm focusing on rebuilding my life one step at a time. I've started therapy for myself, returned to my yoga practice, and am dedicating more quality time to the kids. I've also begun exploring options for returning to full-time work. I scaled back to part-time after Ethan was born, but now I have to think about supporting my family on my own. Legal fees are piling up, but everyone assures me it's worth it to have proper representation given how complicated this situation has become. James's behavior has been increasingly erratic. Some days, he's apologetic and talks about wanting to reconcile now that Sarah is out of the picture. Other days, he's angry and combative, making vague threats. My lawyer has advised me to document every single interaction and to communicate with him only through official channels or in the presence of witnesses. Update number 2. Final hey everyone. I'm sorry it's taken so long to update. Life has been chaotic with the divorce proceedings, work, and juggling everything with the kids. Life has been a whirlwind, and I know many of you have been messaging me asking for updates. Thank you so much for your support. It's meant the world to me. I finally have a moment to sit down and share where things stand. It's been 8 months since my last update, and after what feels like an eternity of court hearings, mediation sessions, and endless legal back and forth, the divorce was finalized last week. Nearly a year of proceedings is finally behind me, and the outcome was better than I could have hoped for, thanks largely to the evidence we gathered in James's increasingly erratic behavior throughout the process. The turning point came about 6 months into the proceedings when James tried to claim our house as his primary residence, despite living alone in his apartment ever since Sarah left him. His goal was to force the sale of the house. To everyone's surprise, he convinced Sarah to appear at a mediation session as his character witness. I'm not sure what he expected. Maybe he thought she'd back him up and help his case, but it blew up spectacularly in his face. Instead of supporting his claims, Sarah told the truth about their relationship, completely exposing the lies James had told under oath about when their affair began. I later found out he had promised her that he'd make things right between them if she helped him in court, but she chose honesty over his manipulation. From that moment, James's entire narrative crumbled. The mediator's report was scathing, highlighting his repeated lies, financial deceit, and overall lack of credibility. In the end, I was awarded the house and primary custody of the kids. James kept his apartment and car, along with visitation rights that, frankly, I doubt he'll use often given his recent behavior. He's also been ordered to repay the money he took from the kids' college funds, plus child support and a portion of my legal fees. The financial settlement was more favorable than we initially expected. The judge was particularly unimpressed with James's unauthorized withdrawals from our joint accounts and his efforts to hide assets. He's required to repay every penny he took from the kids' college savings, plus interest, and the division of assets factored in his excessive spending on his double life. Sarah wasn't the only one to hold James accountable. His company's HR department got involved too. They discovered he had been falsifying expense reports to cover some of his personal spending, including expenses related to his affair. As a result, he's now on probation at work, which has been another blow to his carefully constructed image. We've also had to make adjustments to the custody schedule. James's visits with the kids are now strictly supervised after he tried to introduce them to yet another girlfriend without consulting me or their therapist. Yes, he's already dating someone new. For now, the supervision requirement will remain in place, and the arrangement will be reviewed in 6 months based on his behavior and the kids' progress in therapy. Thankfully, the new setup is working well, the kids feel safer, and the handoffs have been far less stressful. As for me, I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. I've reconnected with old friends, started a small side business doing freelance marketing from home, and am even toying with the idea of dating again, though that's still far off in the future. To anyone going through a similar situation, it does get better. Focus on yourself and your kids, document everything, and don't hesitate to ask for help. There's life after betrayal, and sometimes it's even better than you could have imagined.